Great. Hello, everybody. I'm Nisa Karahazari, and I am the West Kingdom Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. And I'm one of the hosts for this discussion on Brave Spaces. And one of the other hosts is doing sign interpreting right now. So there is me, and I will introduce Ood, who is Principality of Sinagua AIO officer. AIO is Accessibility Inclusion Office, and Ood Infundme. I don't know how to pronounce your last name, Ood.
Ood Infundme.
Okay, I'll just call you Ood. And
That's fine with me.
and our special guest today is Lady Margaret. You can pronounce your last name for us and your second name, please.
Yang, and the name for when interacting with other folks who are Chinese is Yang Jin.
Thank you. So, we talked about this a little bit in the intro section. People were asking, what is a brave space? And the shorthand version, a brave space is another way to describe a safe space. And we're going to use, but the safe space, as you will soon learn, is something that really doesn't exist. We don't really have safe spaces for everybody. But we can learn how to make brave spaces for people at events and also in our mundane lives. So we're going to start with a poem that inspired this brave space idea by Mickey Scott Bay Jones. So it's a modern poem. And here we go. An invitation to a brave space. Together we will create brave space, because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars and we all have caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world, to amplify voices, fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work on it side by side. Okay. So I'll leave that up there, and how about our other host, and Ood and Margaret, if you'd like to start by commenting on this.
Margaret, you're the guest. You go first.
My first thoughts about brave space is that our actions determine how people will or will not interact with us and with our spaces. When we look around a room, when we look at an event and who is in the room, these are the people who are most likely more comfortable with the space. And I always like to think about in terms of absences. I like to think about who is missing, especially in relation to the people that we know and the communities and populations within our area. It's not an exact science, but if you look, as an example, I spent 15 years living in Toronto and I just moved out of the area. It is a city that is highly multicultural. It has significant East Asian and South Asian populations. And yet, despite this high concentration of Asian peoples, I'm still one of the few people who's of East Asian ancestry in my entire kingdom. And so, what kind of spaces are we making? How are people interested or not interested in our space when we think about who feels comfortable in a space?
That's a good thought. For me, when Nisa first showed me this poem, I really fell in love with it. And the reason is it's true. At our events, it doesn't matter if it's an ethnicity thing, like you were talking about, Margaret, or for me as a trans person, if it's about the LGBTQ community's acceptance in an area. At our events, we always think, oh, I'm going to an event, I'll be safe there. But what happens when we start talking and we find out we're really not? The idea of making a brave space means that we've made a space where if you don't feel like you can be brave, the person next to you does. And we can make an environment where you don't feel like you're alone. Or if you find someone who doesn't make you feel safe, we have an environment at our events that we can foster where there are people you can feel safe with, and they will make that space braver, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I will say that in the West, since the issue first came up, which I will start by saying that this issue came up because of an event that was going to be held in an area that trans people were told not to come to because it was not safe for them. And that event site was changed, and which had to do with other issues, not to do with the trans community not feeling safe. But I decided that we have to try to make some kind of a brave space available for people at events, to say that you matter, you're welcome here, and we want you here. We want you to be able to know that we have your back. And the actual event location spaces and whether or not events locations are safe. They'll be talking about that more in the would you attend an event in a war zone discussion after this. But so the way I've started it in the West is to try to have either the diversity, equity, inclusion tent, or the other word we use is accessibility and inclusion office tent. When we are able to have them at events, to have them up and have a Progress Pride flag and other queer pride flags available to tell people that this space is safe. And I've also gotten smaller pride flags to tell people if you want to designate your encampment as a brave space for people, please let me know and I'll give you a flag. And people have done that in the West as well. The reason I chose the Progress Pride flag is because it's inclusive of queer people and people of color. And the reason I have not chosen the blue feather symbol, which I'm wearing, is because new people to the SCA don't necessarily know what Clan Blue Feather is. They don't know that symbol. But if you're coming from the outside, from the mundane world, and this is your first SCA event, you know what the pride flag stands for. Now, in Awurtha, it's not just the tents that are made that are called sanctuary tents, and it's not just for people of color, people who are queer. They're set up also with the idea that people with PTSD might need a quiet space to go to. So these are some of the ideas, and it's anybody who needs a space to know that they belong in, and like the poem said, to turn down the volume of the outside world, is an idea that I think is a really good one.
That also supports other perspectives such as autism or social dysphoria. They just sometimes get overstimulated and they just need like that tent that's just a quiet place. It's not dark, but it's not bright and vibrant and active. It's just calm. And sometimes they just need 5 minutes to like reset. And so yeah, that tent is a space that is meant for everyone to make sure you know you have a space that you always belong. Well said, Nisa.
And sometimes the tent poles don't fit in the truck or something, so we can't have an actual tent at the events, at all the events. There can't, not every event is going to have a Brave Space tent available. That's one of the reasons why I decided to have people delineate their encampments with a flag. Ood has also started this thing in the West, the Blue for You, if you want to explain that, which is also another way to delineate a brave space. Oh, sorry, Telenor. Theron is Telenor. You wanted to have a question?
Uh, Go ahead.
There we go. I'm finding that mute button. Yeah, I did have a question, and we've described things like tents in Oertha and the West, and the West and a lot of the West Coast is a very camping-oriented culture, but other places are not. And so what would you recommend as a equivalent to that in places that are holding indoor events, especially places like the Northeast, where most of the winter, nobody's going to want to be outside?
Margaret, you're in Eldemir. Do you have a recommendation?
Sorry, my cat is currently being very needy. So could you please repeat your question again?
Yeah, since you're in Eldemir, you're not necessarily in a place that does a lot of camping events, correct? You have colder climates than we do here in much of the West. So if it's not a tent, what would you recommend for people to have at events to delineate a brave space?
Depending on what space you have, sometimes there are separate rooms. So if it is, and this is one of my complex feelings, is that churches are most commonly the cheapest spaces and most accessible spaces for people to rent out. And typically there are rooms in the church that can be used. There's typically a room given to royalty. And so we typically also have rooms where we can have rooms where people can have a quiet space. It is not necessarily common practice for there to be some kind of quiet space as of yet.
I haven't seen
Good
anything
idea.
like this
We
in Bright
also,
Hills.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Ren.
I was just saying, I haven't seen anything like this in Bright Hills, and it's something that could be really useful. I'm one of the lucky people who their overstimulation to my autism can produce a migraine. And if I could have 10 minutes away from things, the migraine might not happen.
No, that is exactly right. And that was one of the things that was brought up to us from the autistic community. That is a serious like problem. And was one of the reasons why we decided we wanted an actual tent and not just a region away. We were told by artistic community having that visual block is helpful to give you that space, that disconnect from the overstimulation. What if a conversation were to happen? Because where are you from in your area? Is it camping culture? Would it being donated a pavilion be helpful? or would you need better organization for like rooms, like an elder mark?
Well, a tent would be a big boost, but then be the question of who would deal with it. I think getting the idea in place first might be the way to go about things, so that you don't end up, you try the tent and it doesn't work well, and then people say that the idea of separate space doesn't work at all. I've seen people set up for vigils in little tiny pop-up tents, the little square ones, like people get to market their things at a farmer's market or something. Do you know the kind I mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And something like that you can attach little curtains to the inside of it could make almost a separate room. It would be visually separate inside, even though the sounds would mostly come through. That might be a good compromise when there aren't a lot of separate spaces.
And Ren, I'm sorry, I don't know what kingdom are you in?
Oh, Atlanta. Atlantia.
Okay. So yeah, if you have a DEI officer in Atlanta, you can bring this up with them, or I'd be more than happy to talk with them, with you about it. You know, the challenge is to get the idea out there, and that's part of what this discussion's about today, right? Is to get the idea out there and to start having other people in other kingdoms doing this as well. And it doesn't have to be a big room. It can just be it can be a small room at an event site. And if there is a DEI table or a accessibility inclusion table at an event inside or outside, they can be the point person to say, this is where to go if you need the brave space room or tent. These are some of the ideas that we're talking about already. The car caravans is another thing that I wanted to talk about, but I also wanted to circle back to Ood talking about the blue for you at events.
So Blue for You is they're clothespins or chairs. The idea is that we make a setup of chairs that are for mobility people to use, for PTSD who just need like to sit down and I just need a minute. For people with anxiety who just need to back up. So we have these chairs that are set up along the roads or around the outer side of the big populated Eric space. And they just have clothespins on them so that people know that they're to be used by everyone. And the idea is to give you a rest spot for a few minutes so you can take care of your walker or get something out of your bag, or just you're overwhelmed and you need just 30 seconds to stop. There you go. You have a space where you can just stop for a few minutes and put everything back together again. And it's okay. If you need help, the volunteers that are donated the chair for the Blue for You project are close to that chair. So if you call for help, you have support that will come. They can give you water, they can find a person that you need, make a phone call, whatever. But that's your empowerment to call or not. You have all the power in that chair for the few minutes you have that chair.
I wanted to make a quick interrupt here, and that is that interkingdom anthropology is such that not everybody knows what an eric is. If you don't live in the West Kingdom, the eric is the list field.
Thank you for saying that, because I thought about that too.
My bad, you are correct. I'm so sorry. I am clearly a Westie my whole life. My apologies.
This is my seventh kingdom.
Another idea is about car caravans to events, and this is good for people who may not feel like they're unsure if the territory, the mundane territory they're going into is a safe space for them for whatever reason, which touches on the idea, should we have events in those places to begin with? Also, I think car caravans are really great for people from an accessibility issue standpoint. People might need help getting to events depending on their mobility issues. I did hear from somebody in Owertha that for some of the events, they actually rented a bus or a van to get people to some events who had accessibility issues. Or it's also a good idea for people who might not have the cash to go to an event. Car caravanning is a good way to share that burden, the economic, that might be an economic roadblock for somebody. Of course, so, you know, people would have to negotiate right now COVID safety and sharing car rides with people, but that's, you know, that's something people can do. Any other ideas that people have?
I had put it in the chat, but what if we had like a help sign of some sort to go with the blue chairs? Because even though most of us are verbal, doesn't mean that we have the ability to currently verbalize that we need help.
No, that is a good idea. We have signage denoting it for visual language users so they know they're there. But you're right. If they needed something, we should have visual language support for them to request the help. And I will make those signs. We do have that ability. That is easy. And thank you for saying something.
I'm thinking less in regards to some of the specific actions that can be done and more at a broader spectrum level. All this is excellent stuff. I absolutely love everything that is being said here. I also am, maybe it's just because of things that have been going on across the SCA, but our character, the ways we speak, the ways we interact with others, the language that we use, and how we respond to problems that arise, they all reflect these aspects of trying to make spaces safer or braver for all kinds of people. And I think about, I always try to go back to the SCA's mission statement of core values, which I can link here. And reminding ourselves of these core values in regards to the way we conduct ourselves in spaces. To act in accordance with the chivalric virtues of honor and service in all interactions with SCA members and participants, to be responsible stewards of SCA resources, deal fairly with others, and value and respect the worth and dignity of all individuals, practice inclusiveness and respect diversity, to promote a safe and respectful environment for all SCA members and participants, to act with transparency, fairness, integrity, and honesty, to maintain a harassment-free environment in SCA spaces, and to avoid behavior that reflects adversely on the SCA or other SCA members and participants. And when I think about maintaining this harassment-free environment, I try to think about it in regards to compassion, kindness, and trying to maintain spaces where our most vulnerable are able to feel like they belong. I want spaces where I'm always happy to see spaces where children feel comfortable to participate, that queer and trans people are able to be in spaces, for disabled folks to participate fully to the extent that they want to see racialized BIPOC folks engaging in the work that we're doing and enriching this and making this a global community. And for our elders to be respected and given the supports that they needed. And this is the real challenge of creating braver space, is making space that is able to juggle all these different competing needs. And one last point is, one of the solutions I found is creating more spaces and allowing people to select which spaces they feel they want to attend or be involved with.
And Margaret, by more spaces, you mean?
Like, I'm thinking specifically about online spaces, but also like certain kinds of some events. In some spaces I have interacted with. I'm going to use age as the example because it's actually one of the more major differences in regards to the language and communication that we use and some of the cultural differences. And in one group I have been involved with, their history has resulted in them creating spaces that are designated specifically for older participants and ones that are for more younger participants. And anyone who's in the middle can self-select which space they feel they belong with more. And the point of this is that the more comfortable having certain kinds of conversations can attend this one space, and those who are more comfortable in other spaces can attend this other one. Because there are sometimes irreconcilable differences, or differences that will take significant more effort to address. To be more specific, I think about our norms and languages of what is considered respectful, what is considered kind. And I think about how those who are younger have grown up more with this DEI culture, with call-out culture, for better or for worse.
That call out?
Call-out culture. And the pushback from older generations to these ways of interacting. But one of the things as someone who has been involved with a number of social justice cultures over the years, one of the things I find those of us who are younger are missing are skills on how to interact with kindness and respect. And it's something, and remembering and thinking about histories, how people have changed, and what has informed the ways that they interact with other people, the culture itself. And it's something I am trying to work on, because there was a point when I think about my father's generation, the boomers, who at some point were the countercultural movements, who were rubbing against their parents' generation the same way I rub against my own parents' generation. And I try to think about with compassion that they used to be in my position, and how can I interact with at least some of them in ways that we can find common ground and at least have a cordial relationship.
I think that is really a really interesting sentiment and very true for any of us who are older than 35 years old, I'm going to guess. Anyone older than that has experienced that, where we push back on our parents and we're trying to accept the future, but there's still this newer generation that just does it better. I am curious about what you were saying about call out culture. Can you talk about that a little more? Because I think that's something in the SCA that we really should start having discussions about.
So call out culture is a thing that in especially American politics, a lot of politicians have been pushing back against. Our response to it is often this is not call out culture, this is accountability culture. If someone does harm, such as things like sexual violence, bigotry, hate, all the things that are terrible, there should be consequences to their actions. And that's also one thing I find is lacking in so much of what we do. Is it's so hard for there to be meaningful, lasting consequences to and resolutions and healing from situations that arise in all of our cultures. And I'm not saying prison, I am not saying punitive repercussions. I'm saying that there is a way to change these relationships when I mean consequence. And this can be, in some cases, the removal of people or limiting how they can interact with places. It can look like having conversations with their friends about what happened and what can they learn from the situation. But the point is, when it comes to consequence, there needs to be a way to have a response that meaningfully supports all parties in ways that either where conversations get incredibly difficult because we want to be able to respect the humanity of all people. And this means supporting the person who was harmed in making sure they're safe, and also to support, hopefully, we'll try the growth and development of this person who caused the harm.
Good point, and thank you.
Member of a science fiction group out here that has recently had to remove someone from any volunteer positions interacting with the public for I forget how many years. And some people think that she should have been kicked out, but she's been a really useful volunteer for many, many years. And well, when she messed up big, but there'd be no motivation for her to change if we never were willing to deal with her anymore.
That's true. I really think it's important that we educate and not eviscerate. And that's what I
like
tell
that.
myself with my social justice. And why? Because they can't learn anything if they're dead. And if you kick them out of your society, isn't that, I mean, that's really, it's effectively dead. They're no longer, right? You've kicked them out. They're into another part of the globe. So as far as our perspective sees, they're not there anymore. So it's kind of like they're dead. How can they learn anything? You're right. It takes away all the motivation. Why should they change? They've lost everything they loved already. You've taken everything. There's nothing left to lose. If they're gone, then they're not going to ever learn. If we have to get to the point where we're kicking them out of a society, and sometimes it happens, it's necessary to ask someone to leave if they just can't play nice, right? But I think really that should not be our first go-to, because once they're gone, that's it. They don't get to grow anymore. And they're not
Mhm.
motivated to try.
Exactly.
Right.
And there really needs to be mechanisms in place to apply these norms to all of everyone who is in a position of power, authority, or leadership. Those who are peers need to be held to the highest standards of all of this. And that's something I think is sorely missing. And if we go back, even looking into our own histories, the Magna Carta, wasn't it about that there is no one above the law, including the king?
True.
That is true.
I think it's good to have this talk about, as an educational organization, teaching people, about things that are relevant mundanely and not just about, historical things that we all think are very neat. But I think when we have that discussion about the importance of educating someone rather than just evicting them from the group, it's also important to talk about whose responsibility is it to provide that education. Because I think, at least in my kingdom, a lot of the time, the burden to educate falls on the same person who was the victim of whatever wrong was done.
Yeah, it's totally not the responsibility of the victim in whatever the situation is. But yeah, I think the accountability culture that Margaret's referring to, I've also heard called call-in culture instead of calling out. And some training and some practice for people. And who do we have that? Who do we assign that to, for lack of a better word? Because yeah, it's a different way of thinking about talking to people. Like you said, it involves compassion and not necessarily accepting that whatever thing they did the call was a good thing, but trying to find out where that learning a bit about that person's life and where they're coming from and what led them to what happened. I don't think I'm personally strong enough to do that kind of work. I've done role playing with an organization called Showing Up for Racial Justice, SURGE. They have organizations, at least I know, in major areas in the United States, and they're doing virtual trainings for such things as call-in culture. But yeah, we need this in the SCA, but we also need this outside the SCA, as you were saying. I can't see your name because it's hidden on my screen. We have about 14 minutes left. I just wanted to do a time check and look at the chat now that I can see it again. Margaret, you said that this is why you'd love to see more chatelaines in this position, right?
Yes, in regards to Ainsley Herrick's comment here, what if we had a system where people who are willing to help others who have been made to feel unsafe at an event wear some kind of identifier and have signs up around the event saying, if you're looking, if you've been made to feel unsafe, look for a person wearing this symbol and they will help you, whether that's getting them away from the situation or advocating for them to people in authority or whatever the person needs in that moment. And then Ren commented that would be good. And I added, this is why I'd love to see more chatelaines in this kind of position, they're so important as the face person.
That's a good point. And we could work with the Shadowlands because they do all the tours for new people. And that is a good place to like give that first impression of where to go for a braver space or a safe space, and to start the conversation from the beginning about how to be respectful and inclusive in our language and actions. So that's not a bad idea to include the Shadowlands as a part of this system of organizational support, or lack of a better phrase to call this.
Recruiting the Shadowlands. Good plan of action.
I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. I
The
think
one thing we
Go ahead.
haven't talked about yet. Oh, I'm sorry. So go ahead.
floor is yours, Ood.
Mine was the very next slide. Let's talk about party culture. And the one thing I did want to discuss before this finishes is a big part of where it all breaks down. We do really good in our activities. We do really good at A&S classes. Where I see the biggest breakdown is after the sun goes down and the parties start. How can we still have the fun, laid back party culture that we've come to enjoy, at least here in the West Kingdom, without losing the safe space and having our nightlife not feel as safe as our day life? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
This is why I like Shadowlands once again. There was this one party that I attended years ago that they had people who partied and were part of the party experience, but they were also trained in how to provide support to people in a space, and they were named and given wristbands or some kind of token, very visible token. And in case anyone had any issues, these people were the ones who could intervene. And Revna said, yeah, I get that. And full see that at the last weekend event I went to.
That is actually a cool idea. But who would do the training and where would we get that training from? We would have to like set up a standard for that. But that is a really good idea to have not constables who have that kind of has a bad connotation because of the police force. And it's not like Shadowlands. That is a really good idea to have them through that office, because the whole point of Shadowlands is to support people and find support. Not a bad idea.
Also, I'm involved with the Known World Courtesans, and from what I've heard, some of their parties are excellent when it comes to developing good safety politics.
I've actually heard the opposite.
Oh, interesting. I'm curious.
Well, I don't want to. Never mind.
Yeah,
Please.
you're
Hang
welcome to talk about things. I have not been to any in-person KWC event. As someone in Eldermere, we are rather distant from much of the rest of the FCA.
Well, I think it's more of like they could be better with enforcing anti-bullying policies. And this was only one instance of something that happened, and only at Penzic last year. So that's not to say the whole Known World Courtesans group. So, and I'm sure everyone can be better about enforcing anti-bullying policy.
Hmm. Well, I don't know the people that were involved there or what happened, but thank you for being willing to share this experience. And it would be really good to see some resolution to this at some point. And it's a very good example of, this is a very good microcosm of what we're trying to address. And Ren commented, do we risk making people feel that all this stuff isn't their job because someone else is wearing a belt tag?
I put that in before the discussion of the
Yes.
problem at Penzic.
Yes. About the people who are safety people of sorts. That is a good point to also consider when designing events.
Right. I mean, to a certain extent, I think that the chivalry will tell you that it's part of their job to make people safe. They've told me that before. But whose specific job is it at a party, right? Or can we, and in addition to having parties where these issues might arise because of alcohol or other things, also encouraging parties that don't have alcohol is another thing to consider. Not that people are going to be automatically adhering to all the SCA values that Margaret read earlier if they're not drinking alcohol, but that's something to think about too, is having creating a different kind of party space. I chose to not have alcohol at my yearly Penzic party a long time ago because there's enough parties to go to get drunk. If you want to socialize with people and feel like you're in a brave space, and at my campment, it's a gluten-free space as well. You can come to my party. Yeah, that's another thought. And I want to circle back also to the list of values, Margaret. Thank you for reading them, because I think not just reading the SCA bullying, anti-bullying and harassment policy like we did at the beginning of this event, but we need people to know that these are the values you're signing on for when you join this organization, right? I think that's important for people to know if they don't already know about them. Okay, we have about 4 minutes left, but if anybody else wants to add anything else before we wrap it up.
Yes. There's a point that I think is worth making, if I may. Sorry, my camera's just gone dark. Having just finished off a few years as a Principality Seneschal, I find myself really uncomfortable when I see people directed to problem solve by going to a Seneschal, because I'm acutely aware of the fact that when I was a Principality Seneschal, none of my branch Seneschals had any training in how to respond within policy to difficulty. And some of them will have had training in the course of their day jobs, but we have no consistency, we have no clear ideas about policy. And if you look at Seneschal policies, you'll often see a great deal about reporting and a great deal about certain aspects of event management, like feast-oriented stuff and combat-oriented stuff. But we're very weak from a policy point of view and from an officer development point of view with respect to issues like the ones we've been discussing, like the idea of parties, the idea that no one needs to take responsibility for a great piss-up with the opportunity to turn violent and dangerous because there's no policy saying we need to. And there is not necessarily a positive response from the seneschal when there is difficulty. And as a result, it tends to either escalate, or out of fear of escalation, problems tend to be hushed up. And I think we have room to do a lot of development around that.
Oh, I agree. That's why I wanted to have the conversation. Thank you for saying it. All that.
Yeah, I guess I'm probably going to have to volunteer for something if I'm going to keep my mouth running.
That's how I got here. Just talk to us.
Scary.
It's easier to not volunteer if you sit on your hands. I'm just saying.
I'm coming off a long spate of not volunteering. There was not volunteering because I had a kid. There was not volunteering because I could never get to events because I didn't have a car. It's probably about time. Sit on at least one hand, though.
There you go.
All right, we have to wrap it up for the next class coming in. But thank you so much, everybody, for coming here today. And I encourage you to stay for the next discussion. Would you attend an event in a war zone? Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of today.
Thank you.